Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Mark Richt Show, brought to you by Williamson Automotive. Joe Zagacki, Don Bailey Jr., and University of Miami head coach Mark Richt will join us momentarily to talk about Georgia Tech and look ahead to Virginia Tech. Don, we'll take a moment or two to look back at Georgia Tech. Hurricanes come up on the short end again, 4 in a row now, losing 27-21. Too many mistakes, kind of a self-destruction.
Yeah, it was, Joe. The penalties hurt, but I think the turnovers hurt a lot more. You know, you can't go on the road and give the ball away like Miami did. It's hard to recover, especially against a team like Georgia Tech. When you give them extra series or extra downs or extra drives, they just chew clock on you and you don't get the football back. So I think that when you look back, that's really what hurt Miami the most. I was encouraged by the length of drives that N'Kosi Perry was able to put together without mistakes. You know, you have open with a 75-yard drive and march the field, eat a lot of clock, and score points, and then you're faced at the end of the game with a 95-yard drive, and they did it. And it left you and I with a lot of confidence. If we get that ball back one more time, what can happen? Because you saw the week before how N'Kosi drove the field at the end of the game against Duke and how he put Miami almost in a position to at least tie that, win that game if they could have got a 2-point conversion. And then the same thing happened at Georgia Tech. So I've seen N'Kosi Perry mature right before my eyes in the last 30 days. It seems like he's went from 19 years old to 30 years old in 30 days.
The good news was actually, drives with no penalties, touchdowns. Bad news, drives with penalties, short circuit.
You have to get that fixed, and unfortunately, that a lot of it came from the area of the offensive line. You're going to be in a loud environment against Virginia Tech. You got to make sure you're getting your count down, and they move around a lot on defense. You've really got to hold your water, is a term that they use if you're on the offensive line this week. But more importantly, the penalties that people don't realize maybe when they're watching the game, how can that happen? How can that happen? The coaches are asking the same thing because they have officials at every single practice, every single day, every day of the year. So the officials are there. There's extra credit work if you happen to have a penalty at practice. So it's driven home. So it really falls on the player's lap.
All right, we'll talk more about it with University of Miami head coach Mark Richt momentarily. There were some bright spots. N'Kosi Perry did a nice job as the quarterback. Cameron Davis came on, did a nice job at running back. Time for our highlights. Miami and Georgia Tech, brought to you by UHealth Sports Medicine Institute. It'll be the Hurricanes and Virginia Tech this weekend. The Mark Richt Show, brought to you by Williamson Automotive. Joe Zagacki and Don Bailey Jr. and University of Miami head coach Mark Richt. The Canes coming off a game at Georgia Tech. Another tough night in Atlanta, coach. A lot of different things to talk about. There were some highs, then there were some lows.
Yeah, first of all, that was the first time that I've been in that stadium and come out of there with a loss. It's, at the end of the game, you get your press conference set up, and there's a certain spot that, the media is going to come in and talk with you and all that kind of thing. And every time I've walked out of that locker room to that little spot in the weight room they have there, it's always been after a victory. So that was a tough one, for me personally. But there's when you lose, people tend to focus on the bad things that happened, and there were certainly bad things that happened. The turnovers certainly probably got us more than anything. We know when you play a team like Georgia Tech, you got to maximize every possession you get, and if you fumble, you lose the possession. So Well, let's just talk about the game a little bit. You know, we start the game out. We choose to take the ball first if we win the toss, which we did. Normally we defer to second half because we want to try to get some points on the board and put them behind to start the game if possible. And, you know, we come out of there, and first play of the game, Kosi drops back and hits Jeff Thomas wide open for a beautiful, you know, 27-yard gain, whatever it was. You know, protection was perfect. Everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to do it. And that drive continued down the field. Again, Nkosi throwing the ball extremely well. Had a good third down conversion. Had another throw to Cager on the right side. You know, just methodically moved the ball down the field.
Coach, it seems every week you get the question, how's the locker room, how's the team, how's this, how's that? But I think that one of the most impressive things about this team is there is no division, there is no lack of effort. And you watch that in the fourth quarter, you look at it in the first quarter, they're playing together, and you see the locker room after the game, there's nobody that's split. Everybody's all in.
Well, you're in there, Don. You
yeah,
see,
I see
when
it.
You do your show, and you know what's up, and you know they're just hurting, man. It's painful to not have the kind of success that you hope for, that you want as an individual player, as an individual coach, or as a team. You know, you want it for yourself, you want it for your team, you want it for your family, you want it for your fans, you want it for your school. You know, there's a lot of different levels of motivation, and when it doesn't go well, it is painful. I mean, we pour lives into this thing, and those guys, you know, give up a lot to be, you know, student athletes. It's a lot of work in football and a lot of work at school, and it's not easy. It's not for everybody, that's for sure.
I want to talk to you about Nkosi and Cam Davis in a minute, because I thought they did some really good things, as you mentioned. But also, I looked out in the field. One point, you had Scaife, freshman, Wiggins, freshman, Cam Davis, freshman, Mark Pope, freshman, Brevin Jordan, freshman, Will Mowry, freshman, and Nkosi, redshirt freshman. Yeah. That's a lot of young guys together at the same time. And two things. One, it's probably hard to play with that many young guys now, but if people are patient, usually when those guys grow up together, there are really good results.
Oh, they're going to be great players. They're talented players right now, for sure, and they're getting to the point where they become great players because they know what to do, how to do it, and can do it on a consistent basis, you know. And yeah, I mean, the future's definitely bright, and you know, we want to talk about the future this weekend coming up, you know, but certainly, you know, when these guys do grow up, they'll be so much better than they are today. I mean, I've never known a guy that, you know, guys will get to their junior and senior year, and you might watch a game from 2 or 3 years ago, and they'll watch themselves as freshmen, and they can't help but smile or laugh and just say, man, I really wasn't that good yet, you know. I'm still learning. And, you know, they'll look back and see that maybe at the time they thought they were doing it just right, and then they realized they weren't. But there's a lot of really good things. DJ Scaife, speaking of freshman, he graded out higher than any lineman we had this weekend and played his tail off. I mean, the guy, you know, that's the thing, you know, early in the season it really wasn't that way, and you kind of bite the bullet a little bit on a young guy, but, you know, now he's starting to really hit his stride and play extremely well. So, you know, the more experience these young talented guys get, you know, the better they're going to be.
All right, we'll come back and talk more with University of Miami head coach Mark Richt. Virginia Tech is coming up at 3:30 kickoff in Blacksburg. More with Coach Richt on the Mark Richt Show right after this. Welcome back to the Mark Richt Show, brought to you by Williamson Automotive. Joe Zagacki, Don Bailey Jr. will all be in Blacksburg this weekend for Miami and Virginia Tech at 3:30 kickoff. Hokie Sioux are struggling, coach. They're struggling on defense a little bit, but anytime you go into Virginia Tech and to Blacksburg, that's a tough joint to go into.
Right, and I don't know who decided 3:30. It's been, you know, night game on the road. That'll be welcomed. It was welcome news when we heard it was going to be during the day instead of during the night, just because of the travel and all that kind of thing. But yeah, Blacksburg, they can get it going. Their fans do a wonderful job, and You know, last time we were there, was it a Thursday night or?
It's been a bunch of Thursdays.
I didn't know what night it was, but it was a wild night, and their fans really got after it, and they do have great tradition there in that regard.
Coach Bud Foster, their defensive coordinator, and their defense is not what it's been in the past, but he's certainly still the same Bud Foster, and they're very aggressive.
Yeah, they are. You know, Bud has always had guys play hard as heck and physical as you could imagine, and they'll challenge you in how they play defense. They'll play a good little bit of man coverage, and then they'll mix it up too. I mean, he's really good at what he does, and I know they've struggled a little bit, but you know they'll come out fighting. I can tell you that.
Yeah, he's probably in uncharted territory as well because of dealing with a lot of young players. They've always been a very veteran team, and they lost a bunch of guys in the draft, and they're kind of trying to rebuild their defense a little bit, and it's showing up somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of veteran players last year. They had a lot of great, just talented guys, like you said, guys that ended up in the NFL draft, but just, you know, big, long corners that can run, and you had some linebackers that were outstanding, just physical and tall and long and athletic. I mean, and then they knew his system front and back, and you know he could dial up anything he wanted to dial up. I mean, last year's game against them, that was one of our better offensive performances, and you know we had a couple little wrinkles in there that helped us in the run game, but you know it was one of those games where we were hitting it pretty good. Now we threw 3 picks in that game, but we stayed aggressive the whole game and made a lot of big plays as well. So it was a big day.
Coach, you're winding down in the sense of the season goes, but you also have recruiting coming up in the next couple of weeks. How do the official visits start kicking in, and then what do you have scheduled for the Pitt game as far as visits go?
Well, we've had a couple official visits throughout the season, not many. You know, it's hard to have a great visit and hit all the things you want to hit on an official visit. You want to spend a lot of quality time during those 48 hours that you get on an official visit. When you come, you know, during a game, we're busy coaching the game. You know, now you get to see us coach. You get to see, you know, the team in the locker room, how they respond to each other. You get to see what it looks like at the hotel the night before the game. So you get to see some pretty, you know, cool stuff. But on the other hand, you don't really get the sit-down time that you'd like to have. It's just much quicker. And even when you're looking at academics and things of that nature, it's tough to see what it really looks like on a weekend compared to what class and stuff like looks like, you know, during the week. So we'll have we may have 1 or 2 official visits for the Pitt game. I'm not even sure at this point, but I do know that there are 2 official visit weekends before the early signing date, and the last weekend prior to the signing date, that early signing date, is where we target that big weekend.
This is well, I guess it was their 3rd, or I lost track how many recruiting classes, 3rd or 4th, but now an opportunity for you to start building up your roster. I don't think people realize how depleted some areas were, and so we mentioned in the last segment how many freshmen are playing, so another opportunity to kind of re-energize your roster.
Yeah, we got to do that for sure, and then, you know, there'll be some seniors leaving the program. We know there's attrition for a lot of different reasons, and so it's that constant battle of keeping the guys coming and keeping them, and like you say, developing once they get here.
When you have an official visit, who can come? I mean, we obviously know the player, but can both parents come? What can the university pay for? What are some of the guidelines with that?
Now parents are actually we're able to fly them in, you know, provide the travel. It used to be just a student athlete only, and the parents, if they could come, once they got on your campus, you could pay for everything, the meals and the housing and all that kind of thing, but they had to get there. Now you're allowed to pay for the parents. You're also allowed a total of 4 family members besides yourself that you can pay for food, housing. So in the past, where you could pay for the parents' housing, if they had a brother and a sister come with them, you know, the parents had to pay for that. Now we can pay for two more family members. And my guess is one day we'll be able to fly up, you know, all 4 family members besides the student athlete one day, probably provide travel too, but at this point the travel is only for the parents.
All right, Coach, thank you very much.
You got it.
That's University of Miami head coach Mark Richt and Don Bailey Jr. I'm Joe Zagacki, and we'll continue right after this. Welcome back to the Mark Richt Show, brought to you by Williamson Automotive. Joe Zagacki and Don Bailey Jr. Miami and Virginia Tech coming up on Saturday at 3:30. Well, everybody thought this was going to be for the Coastal Division Championship. Both teams are trying to get into a bowl game, and while Miami's offense has struggled, yet it's interesting. Coach Richt, 100 years of football knowledge, offense has struggled. You got Bud Foster, 100 years of football knowledge, one of the great defensive coordinators. Defense has struggled. Common denominator, young players.
Absolutely, Joe. Virginia Tech wins the Coastal in Justin Fuente's first year. They won 9 games in 9 games. Miami comes around and they win a 9-win season, 10-win season. Now both of these teams are fighting for bowl games. Miami's got to win 1 game to get to a bowl. Virginia Tech's got to win their last 2. And you talk about the youth, especially on Virginia Tech's side of the football defensively, youth on Miami's offensive side. So it's going to be a clash of the elementary school kids, so to speak, when you're talking about offense versus their defense. But it's going to be Miami, Virginia Tech at the end of the day. And you and I know better than anybody how difficult it is to go to that stadium, how loud it is, how impressive it is. And for Miami, you've got to make sure that you execute and you really don't look to do elaborate things. You look to do a few things great and just keep making sure that you pick up on what Bud Foster is going to throw at you defensively.
He's had to change some things, Bud Foster, but primarily he still wants to play what I call the I dare you defense. We're going to put everybody up near the line of scrimmage, and we dare you to throw the ball down the field because we're going to strangle your run game.
The good news is that there's a bunch of kids on Miami's offensive line that have played against Virginia Tech. Gautier's been there, St. Louis has been there, even I believe Donaldson last year got in against them. So they understand it, and they're very crafty. They work together extremely well. They run their blitz. They do a stimming, which is where they move the defensive front, and they do it with almost a cadence that tries to get you to be thrown offside. So you have to be well in tune to this football game when you show up offensively.
Now, the good news, bad news is you might look at it and say, well, they're coming off a game where they just gave up the most rushing yards ever, the most total yards ever. So you'd say, okay, they're right now. On the other hand, Bud Foster will probably get them to play really well. We'll see. They got quarterback Ryan Willis throwing the ball around, and they got receivers that are really tall.
You look at their season, what they had, like you mentioned, the most yards ever, the most rushing yards ever, and you lose to Old Dominion and you give up 60 points in that ball game. Bud Foster, talking about pulling your hair out. This is a guy that for 35 years has been one of the top 5 coordinators in the country. And the bad news is, in my opinion, is he still is, and he's gonna have a plan. And their deal is the lunch pail. They go to work every single time they play a game, and they're tough, hard-nosed kids. And I don't care what the score is going to be. If you're Miami, both sides of that football, it's a full 60-minute deal. When you look at Virginia Tech's defense, it's almost like playing Georgia Tech's offense. That's how tricky it is, and that's how effective it can be.
It'll be the battle of the lunch pail and the turnover chain. Miami and Virginia Tech at 3:30. Now for Don Bailey Jr. and head coach Mark Richt, I'm Joe Zagacki. We'll see you next time right here on the Mark Richt Show.